At Rock Island Auction Company, we frequently talk about the ability to inspect and own world-class and historic fine arms, citing that you don't have to press your nose against museum glass, as REAC President Kevin Hogan puts it. Never has that benefit been more spectacularly apparent than for the carbine we bring to you today. An arm reported to be the only of its kind remaining in private hands, a Civil War arm presented by the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Honest Abe needs no introduction, of course. He's largely considered to be one of the greatest U.S. presidents in history and one of the most famous and recognizable Americans ever. He has monuments, appears on currency, and his birthday still serves as the basis of a national holiday. Items connected to a man of Lincoln's historic stature are largely kept in museums, while his autographs, letters, and other historic documents are among the most collected in the world. Available in Rock Island Auction Company's December premier firearms auction is this second model Burnside Civil War carbine, presented by Abraham Lincoln to Kentucky statesman John J. Crittenden. It's interesting to note that second model Burnsides were only produced from 1861 to very early 1862, because that time frame marks almost perfectly the chronological intersection of these two men and how critical their efforts were to preserving the Union. Crittenden, by this point in his life, was a career and masterful politician. The vociferously moderate Democrat had served as the Secretary of the State of Kentucky, its governor, the U.S. Attorney General on 2 separate occasions, and then back to Kentucky as a U.S. Senator before finishing in the U.S. House. It's no surprise that he and Lincoln would be acquainted, but nearly contrary to the idea of a presentation between the two men, in 1858, Crittenden had actually opposed Lincoln by aiding Stephen Douglas's campaign, despite Lincoln's letters requesting he do otherwise. However, even after Lincoln's defeat, the two men shared a great respect, with Lincoln writing to Crittenden stating, "The emotions of defeat at the close of a struggle in which I felt more than a merely selfish interest, and to which defeat the use of your name contributed largely, are fresh upon me. But even in this mood, I cannot for a moment suspect you of anything dishonorable." While the two politicians clearly didn't see eye to eye in 1858, things had changed considerably by the time Lincoln was elected to the presidency in 1860. While other states were declaring secession, Crittenden was proposing his famous Crittenden Compromise in December 1860, a resolution written to preserve yet geographically limit slavery via constitutional amendment in hopes of preserving the Union. Now, it was Lincoln's turn to oppose. He and his fellow Republicans opposed any proposed solutions that permitted the expansion of slavery as Crittenden's compromise intended. Nevertheless, with Crittenden's wealth of experiences and reason, he was thought by many to be the man who could formulate a solution that would keep these United States united. His subsequent actions indicate a man perhaps driven by this expectation, but also by a fervent desire for an undivided country. Lincoln, no doubt aware of Crittenden's efforts, experience, popularity, and clout, even considered with his cabinet whether or not to appoint him to the Supreme Court. Of course, Civil War begins in April 1861, and both sides believe the Civil War is going to be a short-lived affair. But as the calendar pages turned, it became clear that those expectations were woefully ill-conceived. As people slowly begin to realize that this is going to be a drawn-out, bloody war, strategy and planning come to the forefront. In addition to General-in-Chief Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, the border states that separate Union and Confederacy become essential to victory. Kentucky was one of those border states, and Crittenden was one of Kentucky's U.S. representatives. After his compromise failed, Crittenden began a political campaign that helped in keeping the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and his home state of Kentucky from seceding, along with numerous other far-reaching efforts, he was a man behind the scenes, turning the gears and machinations to help thwart the Confederacy from reaching 15 states and giving the Union a significant leg up. Kentucky at this time is a complicated state, to say the least. It never seceded from the Union, despite being a slaveholding state. In an 1861 election that saw Crittenden elected, 9 of the 10 congressional districts elected Unionist candidates, not secessionist ones. But it had a large number of pro-Confederate citizens, including prominent individuals that tried to set up their own secessionist government. Even Crittenden's family was divided, with 2 younger sons fighting for the Union and his eldest, George, becoming a major general for the Confederacy. Kentucky initially tried to remain neutral, but it was too rich a prize for either side to ignore. And on December 4th, 1861, rebels entered Kentucky. By December, they'd even added a star to their flag to claim it as their own, which of course didn't sit well with the Union, who moved troops there in response. Lincoln famously wrote that same month of Kentucky, "I think to lose Kentucky is nearly the same as to lose the whole game. Kentucky gone, we cannot hold Missouri, nor, as I think, Maryland. These all against us, and the job on our hands is too large for us. We would as well consent to separation at once, including the surrender of this capital." By January 15, 1862, the disputed neutrality of Kentucky culminated in the Battle of Mill Springs. There, the Confederate forces of Major General George B. Crittenden, the congressman's son, met the Union forces under Major General George Thomas. 11,000 ill-equipped men from both sides would face off in the mud, rain, and raised rivers of Kentucky. Despite initial rebel success in a cold, waterlogged, and certainly miserable January battle, the reinforced Union troops finally held firm before counterattacking to the flanks of their foes. The Battle of Mill Springs quickly turned into a rout, with Confederates deserting an embarrassing abundance of materiel and limping 100 miles southwest in retreat to Gainsborough. The defeat was a disaster for the Confederates, who not only lost the border state, but were now further away from critical Union targets, and it gave the North a strong foothold from which to assault Nashville and the very heart of Tennessee. It was the Union's first notable victory of the war. Taking most of the blame for the Confederate loss, despite being thrust into a nearly indefensible position with unreliable weapons, was Major General Crittenden, son of Congressman Crittenden. Wounded himself, he was accused of treason and drunkenness, both of which pushed him to resign as a general officer and quietly serve out the rest of the war. In those days, it would have taken some time for the news to travel to the father about the defeat of the son. As if his serving in the Confederacy wasn't shameful and damaging enough, now his son's disgrace likely wore heavily upon him, even if such a defeat was a pro-Union victory. It was almost exactly at this time that his longtime colleague and now President Abraham Lincoln presented him with this Burnside carbine. Without embellishment or fanfare, what is readily the most historically significant Burnside carbine in existence is instead humbly marked with a simple silver oval plaque on the right side of the stock, which reads, "Presented to the Honorable J.J. Crittenden by A. Lincoln, President of the United States, as a testimony of affectionate regard for his long and patriotic services, to which a grateful people bear willing testimony. February 1st, 1862. While the exact circumstances and reason behind the presentation have been lost to time, it would not be unreasonable to think that President Lincoln gave Crittenden this carbine in a display of confidence in his patriotism and loyalty, in an era when having one's son fighting for the opposite side could have quickly called such qualities into question. Of course, such an assurance by no less than the president himself likely did little to harm Crittenden's devotion and continued efforts for this pro-Union cause. Lincoln needed Kentucky, and therefore needed Crittenden. What better gift to give than the gift that for centuries has signified alliances, a presentation arm? It remained in the Crittenden family for over a century and was displayed for several years at the Kentucky Military History Museum until it was finally sold out of the family in 1992. It's accompanied by a large mahogany trunk inscribed John J. Crittenden and by a dress sword that had been presented after the war to another of the congressman's sons, Thomas Leonidas Crittenden, who served as a Union brigadier general. Lincoln and Crittenden didn't see eye to eye on several significant issues: elections, slavery, emancipation, states' rights, and even admitting West Virginia to the Union. However, they shared powerful mutual respect, wisdom, patriotism, and the unspoken calling of public service. The two were clearly more than just colleagues. These brothers of the Bluegrass State were partners in preserving the Union they loved so well, bound by a cooperation that placed country above party. And this is the Burnside carbine that symbolizes their collaboration, the only President Lincoln presentation Civil War arm in private hands, the Burnside carbine of John J. Crittenden.